Hey, everybody. So today I have Rob Goldstone, who is the individual who arranged the infamous Trump Tower meeting of 2016 and subsequently became embroiled in all manner of investigations relating to Trump Russia, from the various congressional inquiries to dealing with Mueller's prosecutors. And Goldstone, as I think you'll find by listening to this interview, was never implicated in any wrongdoing whatsoever, virtually. No crimes were brought against him, no charges, etc. And yet he's had 2 years of his life completely dominated by an email that he innocuously fired off in a matter of minutes in June of 2016. And I believe this is the most comprehensive interview he's done to date, and I think you'll find it very illuminating. So here we go. Okay, Rob Goldstone, thank you for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
So you, I feel, have actually emerged as one of the most sympathetic characters.
Isn't that shocking? 2 years later, from a pariah to a somewhat sympathetic character.
Well, I personally never viewed you as a pariah, and the outsized and inflammatory reaction to the events that you were implicated in supposedly always seemed extremely overwrought to me. So it's not actually a surprise that you've emerged looking this way, at least in my view.
Well, thank you for that. You know, it's interesting because from the beginning, I always said that Russiagate was a kind of giant jigsaw puzzle of which there'd be many, many pieces, no doubt, some of which would fit and some of which wouldn't fit. And, you know, that if as a lot of people did, they based their ideas on potential collusion or conspiracy on my email and the subsequent meeting, well, then there wouldn't be any findings of collusion by the Mueller people if that was the parameters on which certainly a lot of people who espouse this in the media, on social media. But I sort of knew that that's not the basis on which the people that were doing the real investigations were obviously concentrating.
Well, I don't know. That's maybe true in one way, but not so much in another, because in the Mueller report, which was issued last week, the meeting that you arranged was exhaustively examined for any potential sign of collusive behavior or something that indicated an illegal conspiracy.
But they came to the conclusion that I always hoped and really always believed that they would, which was, if anything, and I'm putting words, I suppose, into Mueller's mouth, if anything, people were naive, including myself. People were stupid, including myself, for not knowing any better. But that there wasn't any sort of criminality behind it or any conspiratorial side of it, at least I know on my part.
Right. So one thing I'm just interested in hearing you describe from a meta level is you've now recounted that email that you sent and the subsequent organizing of the meeting. I can't imagine how many times before the media, before various governmental committees, before law enforcement authorities. Is it just kind of burned into your memory to the point where it's you can't go, not a day goes by where it doesn't come into your consciousness? Like, how do you now deal with that series of events, just mentally,
You know, that's a really interesting question, and I think it's even more relevant if you put in place the job that I did before then, because for the last 20 years or so, before that I was a journalist, but for the last 20 years I was a publicist, and still am technically in theory. And if you imagine that the job of a publicist is to spend their time kind of pitching and promoting clients to try and tempt the media or get the media interested, well, you can only imagine that anytime I would even attempt to do that currently, people rightly would go, well, that's interesting, but can you tell us about your email? Or yes, we'd love to talk to your client. What happened at the meeting? So it's kind of, yes, it's there forever, I think. And I, a lot of people early on said, oh, you're the Monica Lewinsky of Russiagate, which is, I get it, but it's a bit bizarre. And I suppose it's taken Monica Lewinsky to some extent almost 2 decades to rehabilitate her name and herself and to be able to have, I suppose, something of a normal life. So I don't look at this lightly. I do try to make light of some of this, but I really think that for the next, I don't know, conceivable future, no matter what I did, the opening line would be Rob Goldstone, who sent the most famous email in history. Rob Goldstone, blah, 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 Russiagate. So I'm in no illusion or delusion even that, that this goes away. I think it stays for a while. I think this story stays for a while. There's still an investigation going on by various congressional teams, as you know. Then there's an election coming up, and I think people would be naive, I don't know if anybody thinks this even, that this wouldn't become front and center of whatever campaign takes place, no matter which side you're on. So I think this stays around, and yes, it's there all the time. I only have to open any social media. I only have to Google my name with the media. And it's there all the time. And no matter what I say, and no matter how many times I explain why I wrote the email the way I did and what happened in the meeting, it doesn't stop people from believing what they want to believe. All the time, I could go on right now, because I do very often, and check social media, and they go, Bob Mueller must have missed Rob Goldstone's email. He must have missed what he said. He must have... I mean, the idea, the arrogance of nameless, faceless, and in a lot of cases, spineless people spouting what they actually cannot possibly believe, that they have found something that 60 investigators, was it, over 2 years, must have overlooked. But people do.
Right. You mentioned Monica Lewinsky, and it's a bizarre analogy, not least because at least Monica Lewinsky was involved in an episode that was personally embarrassing for her because it reflected on her, private sexual endeavors. And you could argue whether or not that had any moral dimension that she should have been ashamed for. I don't think so, but there was nothing that would have reflected on you that was embarrassing in any way that seems comparable to me. So that is why I wouldn't accept that analogy,
I think people used it in as much as I was, Christopher Hill, the former ambassador, described me as a useful idiot. And at the time I thought, well, that's a charming expression. But then the more I read into it, I think that's where people go. The kind of, I think they use it as a kind of the unwitting sort of, not porn, but the unwitting persona in Russiagate. In the case of Clinton, it was Monica Lewinsky, who wasn't necessarily so unwitting. In the case of this, it's me. And I think it's just the way, in the same way as I wore silly hats and made stupid, internet videos, and it was a good story because it was colorful, according to media I've spoken to. Using a Monica Lewinsky analogy is really just that. It's just another good story. It makes absolutely no sense. I don't own a little blue dress, and to the best of my knowledge, I've never slept with the president. However, other than that, I get it. It's a name that people can, suddenly hook onto. Aha, she was the Clinton thing, he was the Russiagate thing. But, that's the least of it, considering what people believed I was or claimed I was. Remember, I had gone through 2 years of being called a Russian spy, a Kremlin mole, Putin's puppet, a democratic plant, someone that Hillary's campaign put there to disrupt depending on who you read or what you read, I'm all of these things. But it took very few people, there were very few people in the media that said, what is the truth? That said, or is he just a publicist who sent an email for like a needy client? And that's the truth. I know it's hard for people to swallow. I know it's hard for people to accept, but that's the reality.
One reason why it's so ironic that email became such a defining feature of your life is because at the time, at least the way you describe it in your book, which I read and was very interesting, actually, you viewed it as just an innocuous continuation of your ordinary duties as a publicist, and in addition, you knew Trump was running for president, but when you had met with him in 2015, you didn't even know what party he was going to run for.
No, I
initially,
did.
Which is all just to say that you knew him in an apolitical context. I mean, you dealt with him in the context of his dealing with the beauty pageant in Russia in
Correct. And I
2013.
met him 5 times. I'd like to emphasize that. I met him 5 times. I met Don Jr. twice. Now, think about this. I've met I've met these people in total 7 times, the two people. People have written about me that I'm their close friend, I'm an ally, I'm a business associate. I met Trump in the capacity as managing and being a publicist for my client. And I met Don Jr. twice. If you look at the way people relate who I am to that, you would think I was literally a member of the Trump family or a member of the business world that dealt with him. I was none of those things. And in the same way as that happens, people say that they did a favor. They took the meeting as a favor. Well, that might be, but the favor wasn't to me. They don't care about me. The favor was to my client. I was the conduit. And the reason why, I said from day one to anyone that would listen that Donald Trump would be the president of the United States. Some of it came back to haunt me because I was asked, you said on your Facebook throughout, he's going to be the president. Well, it had nothing to do with politics. It had to do with him and his personality. And as I call it, his kind of bumbling, blustering, buffoon-like quality, which I thought would talk to perhaps the American people who were desperate for some kind of change, and that he would shoot right down the center and just come out very relatable. I've said it, I don't know if I said this in my book, but I've certainly said it many times. I always believed he would drive over you in his Rolls Royce to get to his gold toilet, and you would say, that's my friend. And so he's one of us. He's me. And I just thought he had the most incredible knack of making you feel like you were his friend, his mate, as I would say in England. And when I saw him in Russia during Miss Universe, people were in awe of him. It was like they were in the presence of some great superstar. But more than that, it was beyond anything to me. And I give an example where he addresses a group of business and financial leaders at Nobu the day before the event. And one of them says, Mr. Trump, could you talk about the European debt crisis as it relates to the Greek bailout? And he stood up and he said, have any of you ever heard of a show called The Apprentice, which I created? He then spoke for 5 or 6 minutes.
I laughed out loud when I read that section.
Well, it was hilarious about how amazing a show it was, how brilliant he was for coming up with it, what an amazing money spinner it was for NBC. All he did was talk about The Apprentice. He got a standing ovation from these people, and the closest he had come to mentioning the European debt crisis was that The Apprentice was shown in Europe. I mean, that was... And in the elevator on the way down, he said to me, and this is what stuck in my mind, has there ever been a better self-promoter than Donald Trump? And I said, I love that because I love people who speak in the third person because it's fabulous and demented at the same time. And that's what he is,
right.
Fabulously
You related an
demented.
example from your days as a journalist when you approached Margaret Thatcher. Who also referred to herself in the third person.
She talked in the third person, Mrs. Thatcher. Yes, I talk about how I once shouted out a question to her and her minders, and I said, would Mrs. Thatcher mind speaking into this? And she famously said, Mrs. Thatcher would speak into a hairbrush if it was good publicity. Well, the quote was fun, but the fact that she referred to herself, it was fabulously bizarre and ludicrous. And it shows a kind of self-grandizement, kind of this pompous... That's what he had. People loved him, and they, to not make too fine a point on it, they looked to me like they were in the presence of like the second coming of the Messiah, and all he'd done is talked about himself. So I just thought, you know what, if he could charm them, and he's now running for president, well, just wait till what you get here. And people say to me all the time, my friends and people I run into, can you believe how Donald Trump behaves? And I'm like, have you ever seen Donald Trump? Have you ever watched The Apprentice? Yeah, who do you think you elected? Abraham Lincoln? You elected Donald Trump. And by the way, when I say you, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary. I didn't vote for anybody. But so I'm just saying, I come right down the center of this. I don't take sides in this. I'm just saying, I said from day one, he would win. and it would have nothing to do with politics. And you picked up, and I'm glad you read my book, that when when he said to us, I'm running for president, we both congratulated him. When we went downstairs, I said to him, we didn't even ask him which party he was going to run for. And we both said the same thing. Doesn't matter, he'll win anyway. Right. And that's how I viewed Donald Trump. He would do and say whatever it took to be Donald Trump president.
And you have said over and over that you aren't particularly political. It's just never been a major consideration in your life. But you actually do say in the book that if you were to have voted, you probably might have voted for Bernie Sanders, actually, because he reminded you of an older Jewish relative that you from back in England, right?
Well, he looked like my old grandfather. But more importantly, more than that, there was something about him. He was a bit of a disruptor. He was a bit of a maverick. He was a bit of a non-conventional character. So he's who I did relate to. I didn't get a chance to vote for him, and I don't know that I would have still voted for anybody. And it's not something I'm proud of, and I never thought I would ever have to speak about it, but neither in England nor in America, and I'm a dual citizen, I could vote in both, have I ever voted, ever. And, it's not like I'm 18 years old. I'm quite old. It's just I've never been interested in politics, and it's never motivated me, or I've never paid attention to it. And you know what?
Right. When you were a journalist, you would always make an extra effort to try to cover entertainment-related news. Like you go around, correct, like Michael Jackson or even Muhammad Ali, which is more in the sporting area, but never. Yeah. But that was always your area of interest.
And and there's lots of people who are not necessarily interested in politics, but nevertheless vote, as they should and as I should, but I never have. So it didn't interest me. And as I say, the political side of Donald Trump didn't interest me. And in fact, what is amusing is the only real event I've ever done that's even vaguely political was when I represented EMI Publishing many years ago. I did an event with them for Barack Obama. So that had nothing to do with Donald Trump. Then, as I related both in my book and also when I was giving testimony on Capitol Hill, I talked about how what people may not realize is that when Hillary Clinton got the nomination, the Democratic nomination, Emin had a song at the time called Woman. And the chorus
and just explain briefly who Emin is. I know, obviously, but the listeners may not.
So my client, which is what this is all really centered on, is an artist by the name of Emin, but his real name is Emin Agalarov, and he is the son of quite a low level, like I think 50th or 60th richest man in Russia, a man named Araz Agalarov. And between them, they own a real estate, sort of commercial and residential real estate and leisure empire. So what's interesting to me is when I first met with them, all I would hear all the time is they are the Trumps of Russia. So it is ironic in some respect that they would ultimately be kind of involved and embroiled with the actual Trumps. But he's a very successful performer, entertainer, singer, a bit like Michael Bublé type of voice in his native Russia and in parts of Europe. And his ideal was always to break and have a career in the United States. So back in 2012, through a mutual friend, I was approached to see if I would help do that. That is my job. That's what I do. I've worked for many years in the entertainment field. So it wasn't out of the ordinary. What was out of the ordinary is most new singers to hear are not billionaires. They're not the Trumps of Russia. But as an ex-journalist and as a publicist, that's a plus to me. It's not a negative because, as you would understand, when you're trying to pitch somebody to the media, they're more interested if you say, do you want to meet the Trumps of Russia, whose son is a whatever and it's a billionaire oligarch? That's interesting. If I say, do you want to meet somebody who's a singer and works in a Duane Reade, they're just as valid, but it's not as easy for a publicist to do that. And I hope your people know what a Duane Reade is. It's a pharmacy in the States. So that's really who he is. But, he'd never spoken politically. I never heard him voice one political message ever. And in fact, maybe even less so, because at the time he was married to, although separated from, his wife, who was the daughter of the president of Azerbaijan. So he's he's the son-in-law of the president of a country that was formerly part of the Soviet Union. It's even more telling that he never was political, and maybe part of it was because of who he'd married at the time. He's since divorced. But that's why this was so bizarre to me. Being asked to send emails and I've had artists over the last 20 years where they've said, this is the biggest viewed video on YouTube, and it isn't. This is the biggest girl group in the world, and it isn't. It doesn't matter to me. I'm a publicist. By the time we get face to face with the media, they understand the context. It's the biggest viewed, maybe that hour and, that day. But that's what publicists do. Otherwise, we don't have jobs. We can't send emails that say, this is a nothing story and you might not really be interested, but if you'd like to speak to somebody, here you go. What's the point of that? Publicists puff things up. They actually should be called pufflicists, because that's what they do. And, I think in its public record, in the public record for the judiciary testimony, somebody said to me, Mr. Goldstone, would you say that in your career as a publicist, you've ever puffed up an email? And I said, yes, all of them. Because it's true. That's what we do. Otherwise, what's the point? Everyone could do that. There is an art to doing it. And all I will say is that when this story broke, and a year or so later, when I started doing some media interviews, especially in TV, before the interview would start, so many of them would say to me, we would have written the email the same way. Oh, and by the way, if you ever want to see our emails and see what we offer people to book them on TV, you'd be horrified. So I get it. You're never delivered what people offer, but it's to tempt you. It's to start the conversation. And I say all along, my email didn't get the meeting. My email did what I always set out for it to do. It got the call between Emin and Donald Trump Jr. And once they spoke, I didn't care about what they spoke about. I've said it before. I didn't care if he offered to bring Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to the meeting. It was of no interest to me whatsoever. I just wanted to put my client and Don Jr. together. So for me, the most important line in my email is, maybe it's best if you just speak directly with Emin about it. And he answers, maybe I just speak with Emin first. That's what's important to me, because they did. And after that, I didn't care if I was right, sort of wrong, because the two people involved spoke directly. And it was after that, not after my email, that Don agreed to the meeting.
And let's just underscore a particular point here, because in the text of the now world historic email, you say something to the effect of, we want to relate to you information that comes from the Russian government's support of Mr. Trump.
Right.
And at the time, everybody screamed and threw a fit about that, because it at least gave the impression to the untrained eye that it could have been indicative of some kind of collusion plot. But in your mind, support from the Russian government, quote unquote, stemmed at least in part from your observations of Trump interacting with those Russian businessmen in 2013 at the Miss Universe pageant, right? And that they were all bowled over by him.
Exactly. And not only that, because at the level they were at, I assumed, rightly or wrongly, I have no idea, that people at that level, you run banks, you run businesses, also have kind of some government support. They're not there because, they studied very hard in school. But in addition to that, I'd seen, at the time, Donald Trump was one of the few well-known people who had good things to say about Vladimir Putin. Now, this came at a time, you have to remember, when the anti-gay laws were there, the anti-human rights laws were there, all kinds of things were there.
Leading up to the controversy around the Sochi Olympics in 2014.
Right before Sochi. And the only, really, when you look, the world was outraged by Vladimir Putin, but Donald Trump praised him. Even in that meeting that I related before, he said, your economy is strong because you have a strong leader, unlike our leader, Barack Obama, who's weak. Those were his words. So that's for a society. Remember, I've been going to Russia over the last, how long was I there? Maybe 3 years, 4 years. I'd visited 3 or 4 times a year at least with my client. They're a very xenophobic, proud sort of society Well, they fed off that. So there were always stories about Donald Trump's support for Putin. Then Putin would talk about how much he admired. The word, I can never think of that word, but the right word is admired Donald Trump. So you've got this love fest going on. So when I write about this government support, well, it's just a throwaway line when I'm writing it, which is, government support. Think about it. It says led by Emin and Aras. Well, to the best of my knowledge, Emin and Aras don't lead the Russian government. But it doesn't matter, because what has to be taken into, well, nothing has to be, but what I hope will be taken into context is this was a private email written in about 3 minutes on my cell phone to Don Jr., who was a private citizen and whose father, although he was running for president, there was as much chance, in most people's opinion, of Donald Duck rather than Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. If I was writing this to the son of the president of the United States, well, I might have written it. I might have taken a bit more care. I might have chosen my words more carefully. But it didn't matter. I just needed to get his attention because my very needy client, who I delivered everything he'd ever asked me, everything, including, he appeared on the Today Show twice. No one's ever heard of him. I had him appear at the Winter Olympics. No one's ever heard of this thing. I'm just putting this in perspective. He wanted Donald Trump in a music video. I got him in his music video. No one's really ever heard of him. I'd done all these amazing things. This was just another one, another annoying thing that he wanted. And when it's your only client, by then I was managing him, which gets overlooked a lot. I wasn't just his publicist. I was his manager. You either do well for your clients or you don't have clients. So this was just another really annoying thing, which is why I pushed back, and it's there, it's public record, it's in my emails where I say it's a really bad idea, we shouldn't do it. But the reasons were, different. A, it's annoying, and B, it was save your favors with Trump, who seems to quite like you. Imagine if he got elected. I know that Emin would have said to me, let's do a photo shoot at the White House. I know that. Well, maybe, Trump's done more ridiculous things and say yes to that. That's the kind of thing that I would have had no problem asking for. Hey, can we do a Rose Garden music video? But why are we asking this for some random attorney that you appear not to know, and you appear not to know very much about?
Maybe a dance party on Air Force One.
Well, but you know what? That sounds silly to you and I, but that's not beyond the realms of what my client would have asked. Believe me. And also knowing the way Donald Trump behaves, which is, and I've said this, people say to me, why does Donald Trump love Russia so much? And my answer is simple, because Russia loves him. He likes people who like him. So, yes, Emin liked him, was very deferential to him. It was always Mr. Trump. It was never Don, any of that. If I'd said exactly that, can we have a dance party and shoot a video on Air Force One? It's not as silly as it sounds to you and I.
I wouldn't rule him out agreeing to it.
I wouldn't rule him out. I mean, whatever. I often say when people go, how do we deal with Trump? And I always say, why don't you behave like you're on The Apprentice and scream? I mean,
Trump took a glamour shot in the White House surrounded by fast food.
Right, exactly. And isn't
so? He's into that kind of.
He's into that kind
of kitsch, right?
You know what he's into? I think he's into. He plays the media to a large extent,
yes,
and they feed into it because it also benefits them. Because we all have to understand, CNN, I'll just use them for a minute. CNN may, spouse how awful, how dreadful, how whatever he is. But that's all they talk about for 24 hours a day. And apparently, according to reports I've read, that bottom line has never been healthier from people tuning in. So, if Joe Biden was president, maybe we wouldn't watch CNN or whoever or cable network 12 hours a day. So I think, and also they did give him quite a lot of kind of free publicity in the run-up to it, I think because he's good value. He understands what sells. He's a salesman at heart. He understands TV because he's done that. So I think he plays the media. And I think, yes, he surrounds himself with Big Macs or Burger King or whatever. Why? Because it's good press. He'll do insane things. He'll meet Kim Kardashian or Kanye West. Why? because it's great press, and they have millions and millions of followers. You'll see in my book that on one of the few occasions that I went to his office with Emin, he was listening to rap music when we went in. And he said, look, I just got this platinum disc for this song called Donald Trump, and it's had 94 million views.
By Mac Miller, who actually died.
By Mac Miller, who died, yes. And I said, Mr. Trump, have you ever listened to the words of this? And he goes, the words don't matter. It's had 94 million views. Well, that sums him up. So he knows. As I say, Kim Kardashian, who I'm sure at some point will be the attorney general in the Trump administration, but, who's now studying to be a lawyer. It would be approved, exactly. So, and stranger things have happened, we should add as well, of late. But I mean, he's not stupid. If you meet with Kim Kardashian, she has, I don't know how many she has. I'll be a publicist here and say she has 150 million, followers, or a billion. I don't know what she has. Well, that's good for you in his book.
She sells. You can purchase some kind of promo from her on Instagram for I don't even know the amount of money, but it's something
it would be insane. Yeah, exactly. He's smart in that respect. And a lot of times I hear people say, oh, he's so stupid. He's many things. And I'll preface this by saying, again, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't agree with Donald Trump, but he's not stupid.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. And I find that smug dismissal of him really condescending, not from the standpoint of wanting to defend Donald Trump per se, but just how could you be stupid or not have some style of intelligence and successfully
16 or 17 really qualified in most cases challenges and become president and survive
in one of the most stunning electoral upsets perhaps in all of American history.
Right. So not stupid, does dumb things, says stupid things. Those are all legitimate statements, but isn't stupid. And, as I say, I think to a large degree plays the media. And I think, as I said before, the media plays into it. And because I've lived the last 3 years through, I hate using fake news because it's been kind of now taken over and to mean a certain thing. But there's been a bunch of fake news that I know because it's been about me. And what's a shame is that when I studied to be a journalist and was a journalist, there was a sense of pride and a sense of ownership in what you did that was really important. And you were held to a certain standard, but there wasn't social media. So the need to get things up online or wherever in 5 minutes didn't exist. Now, what I think is a shame and what allows him and others to talk about the fake media is the answer to a lot of fake stories that I lived. They went, oh, okay, well, we can fix that online. You didn't used to fix things. You used to get them right to begin with. And that's the problem. And that's why I believe when he espouses this, it's fake news, it does resonate with people because they know a lot of things they hear when they suddenly hear something different the next day or these talking heads change their minds almost mid-sentence. It does strike as being a little bit false. And I just think people shouldn't really strive to be first. They should ideally strive to be factual. That would help.
Well, the media's conduct throughout this affair has just been beyond atrocious. And frankly, you're one of the central victims of all that in the way that you were maliciously mischaracterized by people who were not principally seeking the truth of the matter, but seeking some kind of supposed smoking gun that would come and take down the president.
That you are correct. It's a smoking gun. And, I give an example, and I'll share it now, that what I call the great Anthony Scaramucci story. I received an email which was obviously spam, which I perceived to be fake. The day Anthony Scaramucci became, what was he, the communications director or whatever he was for 10 seconds at the White House. And it came to me, and the email address was something ridiculous like, I am a mooch, 123. So I looked at that and thought, it's spam, whatever. I sent it to my lawyer, said, look what I got. It's obviously spam. And I deleted it. That's the end of it. But as I was asked to do when I was asked to send in, as you are, to these investigations, including Mueller, any emails that mention any of these names, one of which related to, Scaramucci, who worked in the White House, I submitted it, that's fine, through my lawyers who had a copy of this. I was asked about it in the various hearings, and my answer when they said you received an email from Anthony Scaramucci was purportedly. Now, it's public record because Judiciary Committee made theirs public. And in it, they go, oh, could you please explain? I explained what I explained to you in slightly more detail. And they said, thank you very much for clarifying that. That's the end of that. That didn't stop outlets having headlines that said, now Scaramucci and Goldstone are involved. Scaramucci friends with Goldstone. And one of them went as far to write about how I had this long-time relationship with Anthony Scaramucci.
And name some of the specific outlets, too, because it's important.
CNBC didn't, because I was horrified by what they wrote. They did an entire piece online about how I'd received this email from Scaramucci, who was a longtime friend of mine, and who they had an anonymous source who said, not only did I get this email, but also he first met me while I was hanging around the campaign. I never went to the campaign. He saw me on the road. I never went on the road. And all of this. And at the very end, it says, when asked for a comment, Scaramucci either denied or had no recollection of knowing Rob Goldstone. Well, he wouldn't, because he doesn't. And what was missing from that, they said in judiciary testimony, it said that, he got this email from Anthony Scaramucci. But they failed to say that I very clearly say, purportedly, I believed it was spam. I forwarded it to my lawyer and deleted it. Well, that's a very important thing to choose to miss out. And when I complained, they said the same thing. People I know that work within the NBC said that writer should be fired. It's outrageous. It's here. It's public record.
Well, I mean, do you recall the name of the writer? Let's just state it.
I don't. No, I would if I could, and I actually don't. But the reality is, I did complain, and nothing happened. It's still there. And today, if you Google Goldstone Scaramucci, this nonsense comes up. Well, it's not right, in my opinion.
Based on a spam email. How utterly absurd is that?
Which, not just a spam email, but let's go further, which I have testified to, and it's public record. And they are quoting from that publicly released judiciary testimony, but they just choose to quote half of the paragraph, not the whole paragraph. So that's how ludicrous it is. But it's more than ludicrous. It's a gender-driven lunacy. And it's really damaging because, as I say, when you Google my name and all of this, one of the things that pops up is, now, I don't know Anthony Scaramucci. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for people to think you know him. But in my case, it's not a good thing, because what I've tried to say throughout is, I have no political connections. Well, you don't want Anthony Scaramucci popping up when you Google in a spam email setting. So that's just one of many, many things that were said. But it's a perfect example to me because it was public. It's not like the writer could say, oh, I didn't know that. You did know that. It's part of the paragraph you quoted. You just ignored the reality of what I was saying.
Also, on the subject of media malfeasance, and we could talk about that for about 12 hours straight.
Right,
it's something not just related to you, although you're one aspect of all this. You actually quote in the book Chris Cuomo of CNN asserting authoritatively that the call, the quote is, he said, that call didn't occur. And the call he was referring to was the one that you facilitated between Emin and Don Jr. Chris Cuomo somehow knew. I guess he got like divine.
Well, wait, I need to jump in here because actually maybe it reads badly or maybe there's a bit missing. But what I actually say in that is that Chris Cuomo actually, I go the other way on him, was smart on this. It was the Aguilarovs and Natalia's lawyer who was being interviewed by Cuomo that claimed the call didn't happen. And it was actually
I'm sorry. I must have misread that part.
Exactly. And it's Chris saying, you're telling me the call didn't happen. It's that. And then I go back to it where, of course, Emin goes, yeah, I spoke to Don Jr. This is a year later. Emin goes,
I apologize to Chris Cuomo.
No, exactly. And I only say that because of all the people, funnily enough, when everyone was going, Rob Goldstone, a Russian spy, and this, I happened to tune in to CNN. I was overseas at the time. And Chris said to one of these people, or isn't he just a publicist who puffed things up? And it was the first time I'd actually heard anybody say what actually happened or think and say what was the truth. So, yes, he was actually being sarcastic to an attorney saying, well, you tell me this call didn't happen. It was that. But yes, the call happened. And, Don Jr. testified, first of all, I believe, saying that he couldn't recall there being a call, and then saying there were a couple of calls, but he can't remember if they did speak, didn't speak, or what they spoke about. But then Emin spoke with Vice News on HBO, and in it said, yes, we spoke. what he said they said, to me, sounded a bit bizarre, because he said something to the effect of, we spoke and I said, hey, there's somebody who wants to talk about something which you might be interested in, you might not, and if you have time for an interview to meet, great, and if you don't, fine. And Don went, that's amazing. Well, to me, that also makes no sense. But the reality is they spoke. And what I would say is, whatever they said on that call, it went from being a meeting between a lawyer, who we now know to be Natalia Veselnitskaya, with Don Jr. And Don writes to me and goes, yeah, the meeting can now take place. It's on whatever day it was, Thursday, I think, at 3. And I'm adding in my brother-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, who was the chairman of the campaign. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that must have been an interesting call. So even though it's dismissed as nothing, that call, it went from being this, what could have been a bit of a nothingy meeting, to having the chairman of the campaign and Jared Kushner in there as well.
And you hadn't anticipated actually being present at the physical meeting. You thought you were just going to be sort of an emissary in arranging it, but one thing led to another, and you did actually sit in on the meeting, which is, again, sort of comical in a way, because this is just not your purview ordinarily, and yet there you are with Kushner and Manafort and Don Jr.
And all these people. And it's like, again, I go back to things, it's public, right? I was asked, Mr. Goldstone, did you try to keep the meeting private? And I think they ask these questions knowing the answer, obviously. And I said, well, and before I could answer, somebody else in that meeting said, well, we assume not, because you checked in publicly for it and announced what it was on Facebook. So, yes, I hardly tried to keep the meeting private. Secondly, if you think about it, if I had been any of the things that people thought I was, do you think I would have written in such detail? Might I have just said, hey, Don, I know we've met a couple of times. Could you give me a call? I mean, I'm not stupid.
You would have had to be the lousiest Russian agent to memorialize that in an email.
In that. So, and it was so kind of, I don't even know what the word is. There was so much in there that to me it makes sense. It's like this gushing thing to get someone's attention. But if I was really trying to do that with a different, boss, for want of a better word, no one would write that. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to write, but it doesn't matter. The point is, yes, it was a perfect storm how I ended up in the meeting. My eminence said throughout, when I kept asking him what this was all about, it doesn't matter. All you have to do is get the meeting. Somebody else will coordinate, which is a man by the name of Ike Kevaladze, who worked for them and who I knew. And that's it. You don't have to go. You don't have to report back. Nothing. You just have to get the meeting. When I went, because I could ask me if I could get them through security and make sure they got in, because I'd been there with them and myself a couple of times to Trump Tower. He said to me, look, you've met Don Jr. a couple of times. Can you just introduce us? Well, that sounds like a fairly reasonable thing for someone to say. Also, I was a little bit nervous because I hadn't told Don that morning the attorney had emailed me and said, I want to bring somebody with me. And I just basically said, bring whoever you want, just make sure they have ID so we're not held up. But I hadn't told him this. So when Ike arrived with an attorney, a translator who I knew nothing about, and this other person who I'd forgotten she was bringing, I was like, oh, God, he's expecting one person and there's now 4. It was perfectly reasonable for me to be asked to introduce them. I go up. After I introduce them, I say to Don, I'm leaving now. And he goes, why don't you just sit in so you can get them out at the end? And I took the get them out to be, I've squeezed you into this. It's a busy day. I need them out as quickly as possible. That also seemed like a very reasonable request. Didn't care, would check my emails. And I have to say, and I admitted this from the beginning, there was a little part of me that maybe it's the journalist in me that thought, maybe I'll hear some of whatever this smoking gun is, for no other reason other than I was nosy. And so I kept half an ear. I was checking emails, didn't care. And that was it. And I thought, even if I don't understand what these people are talking about, if it's too, in or it's too something, I'll see a change in body language. When people hear what you just used the word before, smoking gun, their body, like they sit up, they they do something. So I thought, you know what, this is a
their
good
eyes
thing
bulge.
So, exactly. So they fall over and faint. But something. The other thing was, I'm representing my client. So I'm not going to say to Don Jr., no, I'm not coming in, go away. Because at some point, I'm still thinking, you know what, on the off chance his father could win, I believe he will. Well, there you go. I know now the son of who could be the president. And it's a funny thing. If you know somebody whose father might become the president, not the president of the local, Rotary Club, but the president of the United States of America, well, that's quite a good in, for want of a better word, as a publicist to have. We've seen that play out. Look at the Michael Cohen thing, where he used that, apparently, according to court records, to try and get work or become more important or whatever. People understand that it is, I'm not saying it's good, but at the end of the day, knowing somebody who's that, it's not a bad thing.
And even people who are like just tangentially associated with Trump have monetized that relationship in the form of best-selling books and everything else. So of course.
And forget even monetizing it. I have a very demanding client who I know is crazy in a good way and would say, let's do something that no one else has done. I know it in my mind. So it's like, let's keep them on, let's keep them close and do what we can. So, of course, I say, not a problem. I'll attend this meeting. Now, again, I've been asked many times, are you mad at Don Jr. for asking you to stay because it puts you in that meeting front and center? My answer's always been the same. The only thing I'm grateful for is that I sat in that meeting, because if I hadn't, I would have been just as open and as skeptical as a lot of people to what went on in there. But I was in there. So people can say whatever they want. I was there. And when people say, oh, everyone lies, they say it's about adoption. It was about adoption, but you have to listen and understand the context. It's not a lie. It just is difficult for people to understand why. And to me, it was just a bait and switch. It was an attorney who obviously had an agenda. We later learned Magnitsky Act, which I'd never heard of, but which I think people know was imposed by the U.S. on Russia for, Bill Browder's involved, all these people that were involved. And Russia put a sanction in place against America on the ban of adoption of Russian children by Americans. And it's been a pain in Putin's side. He talked about it in Helsinki while standing next to Donald Trump. I couldn't believe when I watched that on TV. He's talking about Bill Browder, a man whose name came up in the meeting I was in, and the Magnitsky Act. Well, it's obviously important to him. He's Vladimir Putin. So this woman had found a way to get in there in front of, this team who could become, presidential. And she did believe she had dirt, but the dirt was very generic. It was about, she thought it was wrong that people like the Ziff brothers, who I've to this day never really heard of, and Bill Browder, made donations to the Democrats and to their candidate, who was Hillary Clinton this time, when they didn't pay taxes on it, I believe in Russia. And that was the dirt. And the dirt seemed very generic, so much so that Jared Kushner in the middle of the meeting said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Could you please refocus? And I was happy because I wanted to say, I have no idea what you're talking about, but maybe it doesn't need to make sense to me.
And Mueller says that Jared Kushner was so underwhelmed and annoyed that he actually texted his assistant to call him so he could step out of the meeting.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is I didn't know that part until after, but I did see him frantically doing something. He looked to me like someone who, you see a cartoon where their head explodes and a lid lifts off because they're so angry. He was fidgeting. And the point is, and it's not her fault, but Veselnitskaya has a very monotonous, droning voice. And so if you add to this idea that you're sitting in on something where something that's so generic, like when she was talking about how wrong it was that people like them donate to the Democrats, I specifically remember looking up at Don Jr. and desperately wanting to say to him, didn't your father used to donate to the Democrats? Why is this of interest to anyone? But I thought, you know what? It's not your place and you don't know anything anyway, so just sit there and wait for this so-called smoking gun. But it was very generic. But then she said, what I really want to talk about is the issue of the sanctions and the adoptions of... And I was like, adoption? It meant nothing to me. And I sent Ike a text saying, why are we now having a meeting about adoption? And before anything could happen, Don Jr. stood up and said, I have to just stop you. My father's a private citizen. So I would just really suggest that you address your concerns, which you obviously feel are very valid, but to the Obama administration, because they're in power. So if anyone could do anything about it, it's them, not my father, who's a private citizen. And with that, he said, thank you. And he hardly said the words when I went, thank you all very much. Thank you. They're very busy. And got him out, herded them out like sheep, and just was hugely embarrassed. But but not for the reason people think. I was embarrassed because the very thing I had feared, which is that we would ask for a meeting and it would be nonsense. And we'd be shown to be really naive and stupid and have wasted their time. Happened, but like 1,000-fold. So I held back and said to Don Jr. on the way out, I just need to apologize. And he looked at me and he said, that's okay. I just have no idea what that meeting was about. And I said to him, and I think he quoted this.
So it wasn't just like Don Jr. had this maniacal reaction where he's like, oh yeah, now we finally got the info that's going to take down Hillary.
I have no idea what that meeting was about. And I said to him, it was inane nonsense. And he sort of smiled. And then I could see they were really busy. So I got them all out. Off we go. I called my client downstairs. I called Emin. It was the middle of the night in Russia. And I said, of all the embarrassing things you've ever asked me to do, of which there are many, this was the most embarrassing thing. And I'm sure you'll never hear from the Trumps again. We just had a meeting about adoption.
Hopefully at some point somebody can make this into like a dark comedy, because it does have those elements.
You know, it is funny, and maybe you're sitting there with a crystal ball, but people have said to me, you need to meet a guy called Judd Apatow. You need to make a Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill movie about it.
Nah, don't go to Judd Apatow. He's kind of like...
Yeah, well, I don't even know. Yeah, again. But the thing is, it is in a way, and for a long time, I would call myself Zelig. I don't know if you ever saw the Woody Allen movie Zelig, where the character kept appearing and morphing into these famous historical points in time. But it's like people were like, oh, Trump Tower meeting, Rob, oh yeah, I was there. Email, oh yeah, I wrote that. Donald Trump was supposedly being peed on in oh, I was there. Everything that came up, but it all made sense because that's how I knew him, through my client and through Russia. So when people be like, well, not only did you write their email, but you were in Russia. Well, if we hadn't been in Russia, I would never have met him at all. You know, it's that kind of thing. So the bottom line is, I hung up on him and said, I never want to speak about this again. And the funny thing is, we never did. And so way back, you said to me, does this email play on your mind all the time? Until this story broke, I really, hand on heart, couldn't have even relayed to you one word of that email without, I had to go back and find it and read it. I had no idea.
And now it's like this historic text that people have memorized, like it's the Declaration of Independence.
Like the Declaration of Independence. That's what I said. This was not an official statement on behalf of the Kremlin or the CIA or whoever. This was me writing some nonsense on a cell phone to get Don Jr.'s attention. But it wasn't made up. I also need to point out, it was made better. Emin had basically alluded to all of this, but hadn't said it. But when you've worked with someone and managed someone for these years, you know what they mean. So he had no idea what he was talking about either, in my opinion. I can tell when somebody that I know really close is evading. I just think, you know, his dad had apparently met with this attorney. Well, you've got a big chain of command. You've got the attorney to the dad to Emin, the Emin to Rob, Rob to Don Jr. It's a lot of chain of command of people going, we don't really know what we're talking about. So as I say, I admit to many things. It's naivety, it's stupidity. And people go, what would you do differently? Well, obviously, number one, I wouldn't send it. Not because I now even know better, just because look where it landed me. That's number one.
But here's what's so farcical about all this, right? Because as inane and nonsensical as the meeting proved to be, which everybody understood within about 5 minutes, it seems, who attended the meeting, it nonetheless became not just this object of frantic and hyperbolic media speculation and frenzy. It also became a major law enforcement area of scrutiny that's the reason why you were called to testify before Mueller and this grand jury.
And a grand jury, yeah.
Right.
And House and Senate committees and all of that. I mean, mine weren't public. And mine weren't subpoenaed ever. I was, I suppose, invited to, in a capacity as a witness. But obviously I would do that because why wouldn't you? No one wants to be subpoenaed or whatever. But yes, it became a major part. And more importantly,
Mueller scrutinized it intensively in the report, and if you read it, he actually contemplated whether a conspiracy charge could have been brought stemming from actions taken in the context of that meeting, not having to do with a collusion conspiracy, but as a campaign finance violation, which he ultimately opted not to do. But it actually, it did take on major significance.
Investigated, exactly. And, I'd sort of been told, not officially, but told, you can write whatever you want in an email, unless it's threatening, or it's really, damaging in that respect. You can write what you want. The investigation was on the receipt of it, not the sending of it. So, I never believed I was in legal jeopardy from what I'd written. My concern was nobody wants to see the idea that the people who received that email, meaning Don Jr., and the people who were attached to the campaign, meaning Manafort or Kushner, could get into trouble from my puffed up email. That really was a concern of mine because I didn't know any better. But what I will say is people say all the time to me, people who don't know any better, go, you, Rob Goldstone, should have been the one that had stopped that meeting, that it couldn't go ahead. And I go, oh, yeah, that's right. Rob Goldstone, an entertainment publicist from Manchester, England, should know that. But the chairman of the campaign agreed to go, and he's in the meeting. So shouldn't he know better? And I don't mean to throw Paul Manafort under a bus because he did that quite well himself. The issue is that's what they're paid for or not paid for, or however you work in the capacity as a chairman. They should know that. I don't know anything. I'm passing on information from my client. So, and having been told that you can say what you like in an email, I flippantly say, I could say Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs want a meeting. It doesn't mean it's true, and it doesn't mean it's relevant. It's to a private citizen. And if
maybe you would have been better off just promising that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or Mickey Mouse was going to show.
Well, and some people have said, Don Jr. probably would have taken a meeting with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So you didn't need to do all that. And you know what, again, I mean this I have the greatest respect, and that will surprise people. People say to me all the time, why haven't you attacked the Trumps? You know what? In the 5 times I've met Donald Trump and the couple of times I've met Junior, they've been nothing other than gracious and professional and pleasant with me. And they've never done anything for me to, why would I attack somebody who's never done anything to me? That's number one. But do I think that he was politically naive? I'm talking about Junior. Yes. Do I think he may have been a bit, stupid when it comes to could he or could he not, or should he have sent this? Yes. Do I think
overly
I was
transactional?
Yes.
Maybe.
I thought when this story broke and it built and it built and it built and it built, I actually thought, in a perfect world, if I'd been a publicist for either, I wasn't working with Emin at the time, but for Emin or for Junior and was advising them on this, just say what it is. Don Jr. should have stood up and said, I'm an idiot. I should have known better. I didn't know. Sorry. It makes you an idiot, but it doesn't make you criminal. Emin, I believe, did it because his dad always used to ask him for things, not like this, but he did what his dad asked. I understand it. If your father is the billionaire and you live the billionaire lifestyle, sometimes you do things that you wouldn't normally do for your dad. Both of them, in a way, did it for daddy. I think Emin did it to appease his father, and we know that because in Ike Cavaladze's testimony, he says Emin sent him an email or a text when this broke saying, why does my father never listen to me? He's destroyed a relationship we built up with the Trumps. It was friendly over years, and now it's down the drain. So obviously his father had pressured him to do this. And for Trump Jr., well, nobody cared about him in the election. It was all Jared and Ivanka. So maybe he looked at this and thought, oh, a bit of opposition research, or whatever it is. I can run in and say, look, Dad, look what I found. I don't know. It's a natural. I would do that if it was my father. So maybe that's what they should have said. And, they put out this statement. It wasn't a lie. When people say lied about it, it wasn't a lie. It just wasn't complete. If the statement had said the meeting was about adoption, but we went.
This is the statement that they put out in July of 2017 when the news meeting
when
broke.
It broke. Yeah, and they said the meeting was about Russian adoption the American adoption of Russian children. It wasn't a lie. People say it's a lie. It wasn't a lie. I was there. It's not complete. It should have said the meeting turned out to be about adoption, but we went into it believing it was X, Y, Z. If it had been a complete sentence, then it would be 100% correct. But it's not a lie, because if someone had held a gun to my head when I came out of it then or now and said, tell me in one sentence what that meeting was about, well, I only need one word. It was about adoption. And so, as stupid as that sounds, when you read and understand the Magnitsky Act and the sanctions that Putin put in place, it's all about adoption.
Here's another amazing thing. I mean, in order to bring charges related to a campaign finance violation, one of the things that Mueller lays out in detail in the report is that part of what has to be established is that a thing of value was transferred. And he could establish that whatever was transferred had no value. He could not establish that it had any value whatsoever, which is basically what you maintained all along.
Yeah, because it was about adoption. Exactly. And you're not going to win an election based on talking about adoption. So I think it was a classic case of a bait and switch. This in the same way as I couldn't get my clients interviewed by somebody if I called them and said, hello, they'd like to talk to you about adoption. I know you're running for president. Well, no one would take that meeting. So I think it's a bait and switch. I think this attorney always wanted to talk about Magnitsky. And I think in her mind, and this is only my supposition, it was dirt because she was outraged on behalf of whoever, and we've heard that she has connections to the government, that's fine, that people like Bill Browder and the Ziff brothers were making these big donations to the Democrats and to Hillary's campaign. The problem is, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that, which is why Jared Kushner said, I've no idea what you're talking about or why this is relevant type of thing. So, but that was only ever the carrot that was dangled, the dirt. The switch was what she really wanted to talk about, was the sanctions, the adoptions. And again, why is it relevant, the adoption? Because as somebody explained to me very clearly, if people want to adopt blonde, blue-eyed children, which some people do, the place where they often go is Russia and Eastern Europe. When those sanctions are in place, it cuts off a major source of being able to adopt kids who may look like you and your family here in the United States. Until someone explained that to me, that also didn't make sense. It makes some sense, makes perfect sense. So, we've already heard that the Magnitsky Act is a thorn in Vladimir Putin's side, so that makes it important. We learned that Veselnitskaya is an attorney representing, doing whatever possible to lift those sanctions. Well, of course it's important to her. So all of this was important, including the dirt. It's just the dirt wasn't what people thought it was, i.e., it was nothing. It was a generic comment about how the architects of the Magnitsky Act, Bill Browder and the Ziff brothers, were making these what she perceived to be outrageous and illegal donations to the Democrats and to Hillary's campaign.
Let me ask you this. In the book, you recount the questioning you underwent before the House committee by Adam Schiff, who's one of the leading proponents of the entire kind of Russiagate narrative. And even in the wake of the Mueller report being issued, he's still running around saying that there was collusion of some kind. It's now reached the point where it's like, I don't know, metaphysical collusion or some collusion that is like not defined by any empirical
collusion
reality.
Illusion, maybe, but whatever. Yeah.
But you actually characterized his questioning of you as saying he at times reminded you of a kind of angry schoolboy, seemingly ready to stamp his feet in protest if he didn't get the answers that he wanted. So just elaborate on what that
like a petulant child. I just, the problem I felt for somebody like an Adam Schiff who's doing his job in what he believes is right and what he wants, the conclusions he wants to draw, is that when you meet me, I'm not who you think you're about to meet. So when I'm asked questions like I sort of went down that road before of, I'd created for Emin when Hillary Clinton got her nomination, and Emin had a song called Woman. And the chorus said, no matter what they say about you, woman, we know you're amazing. I said to Emin, this would be amazing to do, and let's submit it to the Clinton campaign. Maybe they'll use it. But in the meantime, let's do a video of it with your song. And he goes, that's great. I'm going to post it. And he posted it. And we did. And he had to actually take it down a day later because there was an outpouring of kind of hate in Russia. And it all ended up on his Instagram. And he was like, oh, my God, let me just take it down. But he was... Well, they didn't understand that because people said, wait, now you support Hillary Clinton? I was like, I don't support anybody. That's the point. I support my client. So I didn't fit the narrative and I didn't fit into what they hoped I'd be. So my answers didn't really give Adam Schiff or people like Adam Schiff what they hoped it would. I think they hoped that I would say that, I was told that the Russian government had ordered this and well, it isn't that. And so when I I also, I suppose, in a way, may have been a bit disarmingly honest in saying what it was, which is I puffed it up. And I think you can't then go and attack somebody and say, didn't you puff it? Oh, yeah, you just said you did. So it makes it all a bit, and at times, I just felt like he had the demeanor of a petulant child that wanted to stamp their feet and go, I want you to be something that you are not, perhaps. And I did think it was interesting that, I'd read that lots of people who did that same hearing, their testimony was leaked. On some occasions, I think during either Junior's or Kushner's, maybe, it was leaked during the hearing. And some fingers pointed to certain congressmen. It was interesting that none of mine was leaked. Nothing that I said was leaked. So it was interesting to me. And yes, I thought his demeanor, and I think it's quite a valid point, was I wasn't the person that I think they hoped I was. Because if I had been that person, and if I had written it for those reasons, well, it may have helped their case a little bit. But I wasn't. The point I tried to make, and it's hard for people in politics to understand this, is I'm not political. I don't care. I was promoting my client, and I would have aligned him with Hillary or Bernie or Trump or anybody else. That's it. I think in one of these hearings, I actually said to his congressman, I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for her. And with respect, I wouldn't vote for any of you either. So it's that. But it's true. It's just, I don't care. And so it sounds glib and it sounds to some people outrageous and awful. It's just the truth. It is what it is. So
you say he had a petulant demeanor. I mean, did his approach also take the form of trying to kind of, maybe not maliciously, but over aggressively attempting to elicit information from you that he would perceive to be in keeping with his preferred narrative, or trying to, provoke you in any way into giving him incriminating testimony?
Well, here's the thing. There was a very big difference, in my opinion, between the Mueller questioning, the grand jury questioning as well, and those that took place, Capitol Hill, Senate, Congress, because one is partisan and one isn't. And there's no question that, when you're asked the same question, 24 different ways, because half of the people want it one way and half want the other, you kind of get used to that. But it's still a bit alarming, because, it's agenda driven. And I suppose it should be, because one's trying to prove that there is something to this, and one's trying their best to prove there isn't. The funny thing is, one of the most contentious things happened between myself and Trey Gowdy. I mean, it was just hilarious with him going, when I talked about this Clinton video event, he stopped and he goes, Mr. Goldstone, you're telling me now you're a Hillary Clinton supporter? I don't understand it. I said, I realize you don't understand it. And he goes, I said, I'm not a Hillary Clinton supporter. I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. That's the bit you don't. I don't understand. I said, I understand you don't understand, but let me try and explain it. I'm an Emmons supporter. And I went through and he goes, I don't understand. And what I wanted to say to him was, there was a quote I'd read.
I like the attempt at the South Carolina accent.
Did you like that? That was the South Carolina accent. And I describe him as looking like a whippet in my book, which is much worse than, I think, a naughty schoolboy. But anyway, the point of it was, I said to him, the reality is I was pro-Emin. I wasn't pro-Trump. I wasn't pro-Clinton. I was pro-Emin. And only when you've managed and spent 24 hours a day with a client who you're trying to break into this world, do you understand that? And some of the staffers who were involved in this afterwards said, do you mean the way we have to deal with our bosses? So they get it. It's the same thing. They're, I'm sure, asked to do things that they wouldn't necessarily want or need to do. So, yes, it wasn't so much that it was just Adam Schiff, although I found him the most kind of angry schoolboyish of all of them. But he didn't provoke me in the way that I know what you're saying. And no, but they asked questions in such a way that obviously there is an agenda, but it's an agenda that you would expect when they're going full out to try and prove something.
Yeah. So you actually contrast Mueller's interrogation or questioning with the Congress's
with all
questioning.
Of the others,
right. And you say that,
because there's no agenda. The agenda is,
it was more logical and,
it's logical, pure logical. It's methodical, and it's almost it's too dramatic word. I was about to use a publicist word. It's much less hysterical, meaning screaming. Then, the first one I did, which was, I think, House, I have to think now, Senate intelligence, but it was with staff. A couple of mine were with staffers. Only one of mine were with actual congressmen. But it was almost like a free for all with people, staffers, and then from each side shouting questions at you and asking things and doing things. And it's very confusing. Number one. Number two, you understand and are made very well aware that you have to take ownership of these words that you're about to espouse, and it's very nerve-wracking for somebody who has never even visited the Capitol as a tourist or has dealt with any of this, and suddenly you're there giving evidence. Yes, you're not under oath. The only time you're under oath is with the grand jury, but it's the same as being under oath, So that you can't have opinions. I'm a publicist. I deal with opinions and thought and whatever. You have to deal in facts. And I don't know if I say this in my book, but on one of them, I can't remember which one, they said at lunchtime, oh, there's a place downstairs, you can get something. Do you know what you'd like? And I said, oh, which do you think is better? And I said, you know what? Because of all of this, you've made me so paranoid, I don't have an opinion anymore. So yes, a salad's good. Yes, a sandwich is good. Yes, whatever. But I don't have opinions anymore. I only have facts. Thank you very much. And that's how demented they'd made me, which was, the opinions you've asked me are my opinions. That's fine. I didn't mean they're right, but those are my opinions. With them, you can only deal with facts. So it's when you have a partisan setting with people, I mean, we've seen it in the hearings that have been public. You're asked the same thing a bazillion different ways and with a different agenda. And sometimes the people asking seemed to me like an angry schoolboy who wanted their own way and was a bit annoyed. And sometimes, and I may add, he's not the only one, I just use him as an example, but the Mueller thing was very much what you would expect, and the grand jury was the grand jury, terrifying for different reasons. But, you're out there on your own, there's 23 people sort of staring and hanging off your every word, you're under oath, and you don't have legal representation. So it's all a bit of a scary thing. But again, logical, methodical, and doesn't have that same partisan sort of, agenda.
And you never perceived yourself as having anything to hide in terms of potential criminality or anything like that.
Never.
But nonetheless, those are very high pressure situations, because if you even misstate something innocently, it can, if the people, if the authorities want to, theoretically, they can construe that as an offense to be charged.
Yes.
So,
yes. And it's a huge thing that weighs on your mind. I say in the book, I ran into, a day or two before I was doing, I think, Mueller or the grand jury, I ran into a very prominent entertainment attorney here in New York in a deli where I was having breakfast. And he said to me, I want to tell you something. He goes, just don't lie to them. He goes, that's how they get everybody. And to me, it was obvious. Why would you lie to them? But it's sensible. Can you remember what we said an hour ago on this call? Well, maybe bits of it, but not all. And when you're held to that, and when you've also, given testimony to others, so it's compared to that, you have to be really precise, and you have to only tell what you know. And everybody has an urge to sort of add a little bit of their opinion or their thoughts into things, and you have to just try your best not to do that. They don't want your opinion. They don't want your thoughts. They just want fact. And it's hard. And it's hard to recall. It's funny. At one of these, I can't even remember now which one. When I was talking about meeting Don Jr., I related the 2 times I met him. And then I said, oh, by the way, yes, I did meet him at a meeting at Trump Tower. I mean, I'd literally forgotten that there'd been a meeting at Trump. And they went, no, that was a given. We understand that. But what I'm saying is, if someone had said to me, are those the only times you'd ever met him? At that moment, I might have said, yeah, well, it isn't. I also had a meeting at Trump Tower. So, but it's those things. It becomes very difficult to say. And I do also think, we have to be real here. If you say, I don't know what really, but if I'd done that and said that, I don't believe for 1 minute they would say, we're going to charge you because you forgot to tell us you were at Trump Tower. I mean, they're not stupid. It's not that sort of thing. But yes, it's important that you say accurately and you only deal in fact. And I know, because I was one of the people that says, well, that's obvious. Try doing it and see what happens.
So you didn't. So when you were engaged with the Mueller prosecutors, you didn't have any sense that they were being particularly overzealous or trying to entrap you or anything
No.
like this. That's how other people who were interrogated by Mueller over the course of the investigation. That's
No.
what they've relayed.
No, not at all. And in fact, I got the sense from what they said that they were in fact saying that it's not about the email. You can write whatever you want in an email, as I said before, as long as it's not, threatening or whatever. We just need to understand why it was written the way it was, where the information came from, and what happened at the other end. So, no, I never got a sense of that from them, that it was, and if anything, I got a sense of comfort from the fact that, A, I'm there in a witness capacity, not as a target or a subject or any of those things. And B, they're asking me to witness things and to relay things almost as if I've witnessed a serious road traffic accident and I'm the person who was right there for all of the key moments. Could I relate that? It was very much about my relationship with my clients, the Aguilaros, and really it's Emin. I only ever represented Emin, not his father, but for the purposes of this, let's call them the Aguilaros. Their relationship with Trump, my relationship with Trump, their relationship with Putin or the Russian government, and the things that I was involved in, the Miss Universe pageant, only because Trump was there. They're not really interested in beauty pageants. The fact that Trump was in Moscow, it's a key time. And then the email, the Trump Tower meeting. That's it. It all made perfect sense to me.
In a way, their lack of aggressiveness with you reflected probably an understanding that you are not, in fact, this linchpin of some kind of grand global espionage conspiracy. Otherwise, they might have been a little more, assertive.
Just a little bit. I also believe that, and I think it's probably factual to some extent, people that are doing this level of investigation know the answers before they ask you the questions. So they have to hear it from you. But they've already investigated it. So it's not like when I'm saying for example, when I'm saying the reason that Donald Trump wasn't around for a few hours during the time he was at the Ritz-Carlton, and we've heard all the Steele dossier things about being peed on or not peed on, whatever, is because we had him doing a music video that people didn't know about. Well, they'll know that. It's not, but they need to hear you say that. Or that, I checked in for Facebook. They know that. It's not. But so I think, yes, you go into it and they want to see, I think probably if the story you tell is probably what they have investigated, and to hear other things, which either makes it better, worse, or whatever. But no, I never felt for 1 second that they were trying to trap me or get me to say something or get me to implicate anybody at all. I got the impression that they wanted to hear my story almost as if I was a very significant witness to a very significant event and could tell it from an objective standpoint. Because even though CNN often put up a chyron that said the Russians, and I would call them and say, why am I in there? I was born in Manchester in England. I'm not actually Russian. And so now they call me the other because they don't know what to call me. It's like they know the story. It's just, they're smart. And that's why I said it at the very beginning. These faceless, nameless, anonymous, people who pontificate on social media, we know better. We don't know better. And obviously they don't know better, but I'm just saying the arrogance to think they know something that these people don't. Or if they've said, well, there wasn't enough, there is no conspiracy, no collusion, well, they're wrong. Well, okay, you know what, they're wrong. So people think O.J. Simpson murdered his wife. You know what, he got a not guilty verdict. There you go. According to the rule of law, he was not guilty. You shut up. That's it. That's how it happens. Sometimes it happens. But realistically, I have to say, I think Mueller report was very clear on this. And I think it actually said, in as many words, one of the reasons they decided there was no reason to bring any form of charge against campaign violation or financial is because it didn't amount to anything. It had no value. And the other, I think, is it said that Don Jr., I don't know if it said anybody else, may not have understood. It's sort of what I said earlier on. I may have used different words, that he was naive or ignorant or a bit stupid when it came to what he could and couldn't do. But I think it said that as well. So yes, it may have been something that should never have happened, but it wasn't done, not malicious is the wrong word, but it wasn't done in a conspiratorial way. With a corrupt intent. That's what I was trying to get to. That's what I believe it said.
Right. And I think you mentioned these social media pontificators, and yeah, they do exist. And if you have any presence on social media, you encounter them incessantly. But
right.
I almost think to dwell on them it reduces the scale of the media malfeasance here to, or it oversimplifies, or it doesn't quite capture it. Because I mean, you cite a New York Times article which described your background in journalism and PR. As they characterize it as, quote, ideal training in what Russian intelligence agencies call compromat. So they're saying that this is all an indication that you are this long-standing agent of Russian intelligence, or that at least is the strong implication, and that's just beyond preposterous.
And that's the New York Times. They also, because I called them out, and they also said that I was a vodka-swilling, chocolate-inhaling playboy. Now, you and I have never met, but I can assure you I'm actually none of those things. And, I actually take exception with many of the things that they wrote, actually, the New York Times, because in a few instances, they cite as verifiable sources blogs and bloggers and things. Well, you know what? I believe that because someone has a cell phone or a blog and in their bedroom writes some blog, they're not a journalist. They're somebody with a cell phone and a blog. And so to make those people believable as verifiable sources.
Well, they might have legitimate information at times, but at the very least, it needs to be checked.
It needs to be checked. But the what? Yeah, exactly. No, and I take your point that is true. But what I'm really trying to say, it doesn't mean that anybody with a cell phone and a blog should be allowed to call themselves a journalist, and therefore that you can then take what they say and call it, well, we sourced it. Well, that's great. I could source it to the cat that just walked past me. But the point is, you're a respected outlet. They are a blog with X number of followers. I just found it outrageous that often the sourcing of this was to things and to people that, I wouldn't even pay them any attention. But that's the world we live in. So whilst, yes, we can discount social media, I do think that they're fueled by the actual media and a lot of agenda-driven stuff. And I am at the center of it because, as they've said, I am, I'm perceived as, to many people, the reason Donald Trump is in the White House. And the reason I know that is because people come up to me all the time and say, thank you. And I go, for what? And they go, because Donald Trump is president. And I say, and that has to do with me because, and so it goes on. And the reality is, I was in Charleston and I was in an airport line at TSA, and this is how insane it's become. And a woman came up to me, pointed at me and went, oh, it's Donald Trump. And I wanted to say to her, yes. And I wanted to say, this has now reached a level where I used to be screamed at because I was the reason he got there. Then I was the person that set up this hateful media. And now I'm just him. So it's really, that's the world. We live in this 24-hour, nonstop, incessant need for people to be fed agenda-driven information. And sometimes it's very dangerous. I relate in my book. I had a guy who leant in through a car windows and screaming in my face, tried to open the door. It's all captured on my building's CCTV. In theory, if my friends hadn't driven off, would have, I don't know what he would have done, but when you lean in and try and sort of like grab somebody and screaming, because he was incensed that Trump was in the White House. Well, again, he can't scream at Trump except at a TV. So you go to the next available, you go down eventually, maybe you run into me as this person did. And it's dangerous and it's frightening. And it's, again, I go back to it. I was a publicist who sent an email for a very needy client. That's what it amounts to. And so a very demanding client. And so it's a scary situation. And I make light of some of this, but I also understand that at the core of what was being investigated is a very serious issue, which is, was there outside influence from an outside power into the election? That's very serious. It has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, and I think, it's easy to make light of, and as we mentioned before, there are some darkly comical elements of all this, but at the same time, I really just on a personal note have to take serious exception with the really malicious ways in which you were characterized, and your appearance was mocked, and all your personal life was sifted through, and people who you hadn't spoken to in years, right? And really deceptive media accounts from supposedly authoritative sources,
right,
just maligning you for no good reason, because as we now know, you essentially did not do anything wrong, and maybe it was a little dim-witted, but we all do dim-witted things.
Right. And as they know, because what's ironic is when I would later meet a lot of these writers and presenters or whatever, they'd also say something which is, we always knew the story, but you were a very good story. And so they liked the fact that I wore funny hats and made strange videos and did all that. Because that, and you know what, as you know from my book, I was a tabloid journalist for many years, and I wasn't some, Pulitzer prize-winning, columnist. I was a tabloid journalist. I understand it. But the point is, there comes a point where you have to tell the truth. And, it's just, I don't know, the media really made me, at one point, I really, maybe I've softened a bit, but I said to anyone that would listen, I used to be proud to call myself a journalist. Even when I was a publicist, if people said, what's your profession? I was a journalist. I was at the time, a year ago, if you'd asked me, embarrassed to call myself a journalist. Now I'm maybe a bit down the center, but I no longer would ever even say that. I think it's been tarnished, the profession, to some extent, by this agenda-driven nonsense. It's
absolutely,
not news.
It's been tarnished, and I am somebody who conducts journalism, and I receive financial compensation for it. But I'm also embarrassed to be associated in the public mind with these people who have conducted themselves so reprehensibly.
And who change their minds. Or that's one of the problems about news becoming opinion and almost becoming entertainment. Because we have to take it that a lot of these cable shows, they're not news, they're entertainment. There's no real difference between, Simon Cowell on American Idol screaming and saying outrageous things, and people on a CNN or an MSNBC or whoever, or Fox panel screaming and shouting and carrying on. It's the same thing. It's entertainment, just in a different way. So I just think if people understand that, but the problem is they don't. They tune in as if they're getting their news. Well, it's not news. It's entertainment. It's politics as entertainment, and it has repercussions. And one of the repercussions, I think, which a lot of them feel responsible for, is whether they like it or not, the way they made politics as entertainment helped get Donald Trump elected. And so that's why I think it's smart for a lot of them. And it really kind of bites them a little bit, because on the one hand, they love it. People have never tuned in such numbers. And on the other hand, they feel responsible in some way because it's not who they would want to be there. And so it is what it is, and maybe the lesson of all of this is that it shows people that anybody can be anybody who has some know-how. And obviously, again, we've said, it's not stupid that he beat a lot of very qualified people, can become the president. And if you don't want that person to become the president, do what Rob Goldstone never has and go out and vote. And so that's the answer to it all. It's not 24 hours a day of screaming and shouting. It's
aimless speculation and, all that.
Yes. Even now, you see, the fact that there's presidential debates and things on now, it's just beyond. And it's all repeating itself again. They're all going to pull each other apart and do all. It's just, to me, it's fascinating, but it's become entertainment. And I think it's a shame. And that's why I often watch news programs, most of which are actually from overseas, like British or Australian news, where politics is a 5 or 10 minute section in an hour's news bulletin. It's not 24 hours a day. And there are
it's not an obsession that dominates everybody's life, it seems.
Well, there's other stories in the world happening as well. It's not just that. As someone who grew up in England, Brexit's quite a big story as well. And England looks at it as kind of Brexit's their Trump and Trump's their Brexit, and it's all of that. But it's a perfect example. Brexit's a perfect example of people who voted for something they didn't really know what the heck they were voting for, if you listen to them, and now want to do it again. Well, you can't. You should have just known what you were doing in the first place. And so the same is true. I've yet to find a person who says they voted for Donald Trump. And I always laugh and say, well, somebody must have done. Somebody's voted for him somewhere. And it's the same when you go to England.
Just a couple of tens of millions.
Yeah, right. In England, I never voted for Brexit. I've never met anybody who voted for Brexit, whatever. Well, somebody did, because 17 million people voted to leave, and in theory they're leaving. I hate saying they're leaving because I don't know if they'll ever leave. It might just go on forever. But in theory, it's the same sort of thing. So know what you're doing and have your own opinions. And again, this might sound controversial. It's quite a good way to close on it, maybe even is. I understand what people say about Russia or whoever interfering and Facebook ads and doing whatever. But I have to believe that if I was going to vote for somebody, I wouldn't care if I got 100,000 weird messages, funny things like linked to somebody with completely opposing ideas. I still wouldn't vote for them. So I don't really understand how somebody can influence you to that degree, because people, to the most part, know what they're doing or they don't do it at all. I think everything has to be taken realistically, and you have to be real at the end of the day. And so all I'm saying is, it's only for me, Russia, China, whoever can send whatever Facebook messages, whatever subliminal, they can do what they want. I still hold the same opinions, and I would still vote if I was going to vote the same way. It wouldn't change my vote. Maybe I understand some people are on the fence, on the edge, but at the end of the day, it takes a lot more to make people behave, I believe, the way they do than whether you get some Facebook ads. So again, was there interference? According to the intelligence services, yes. And I think they should look back and see just how many elections have been interfered with and how many countries around the world have interfered in each other's elections. And I think all of that should be fixed. But that has nothing to do with me or my puffed up email.
Yeah, and we should close, and I appreciate you taking the time to have an extended conversation with me, because if people have heard about you at all, it's in these kind of misleading snippets, or it's in these very abbreviated formats that you just necessarily don't give a full picture.
And it's without context. I'm asked a lot why I wrote a book, and I didn't write a book to sell 1 million copies. I didn't sell 1 million copies. I wrote a book to put my story in context. All I care about is that people look at my story in context and then form their opinion. Then I'm fine. You don't have to like me. You don't have to support what I said. You don't even have to believe what I said. But just look at it in context, not out of context. It sounds ludicrous and unbelievable. I get that. In context, to me, it makes sense. And it makes sense because that's how it happened.
Yeah, but the one thing I wanted to ask you in closing is, so you were a publicist, and you've gotten incredible amounts of publicity over the past years. Maybe not in a way that you ever would have anticipated, but nonetheless, have you now found that there's been like a plot twist whereby you're able to somehow leverage this to bolster what you had been pursuing prior to June of 2016? Is there kind of a silver lining in that way?
If there is, I haven't seen it. What I believe is that I'm no longer able to do the job that I was doing before, and it's somebody said this, and I hate using this, so I attribute it to someone else. But I became the story, so it's hard to be pitching stories when you are the story. So what I'm hoping will happen as time goes on is that perhaps I can almost go backwards. Before I was a publicist, I was a journalist. I worked in radio. I was a presenter, a broadcast, all of that. And I think maybe, perhaps in the UK, rather than here, where I'm still perceived as somewhat of a pariah, despite what you said, that maybe I have to go back into that world, and maybe this experience will have given me a different perspective, and media outlets will find that interesting, and therefore I can work in that field. But I really think that as far as could I be an entertainment publicist, no, for two reasons. One is, as I said, I'm a bigger story than most of my clients, and second is, I understand that potential clients, prospective clients, have a concern because they voiced it about an association with somebody that has been so deeply investigated on all fronts. Does it mean that their business is now in some way tied to this? Will they be? I get it. It might sound unreasonable, but it's legitimate as far as I'm concerned. So I get it. They're nervous. They hear words like FBI, and they're nervous. They would be. So it's almost impossible almost impossible to do. I do bits of things for friends. I do some PR bits for friends. I even launched a sandwich with Mario Cantone last year. So, but mad thing.
I'll have to try that.
It is very good. But the reality is, I get it. It's very hard to do so. And so I tried, and when I call, they go, yeah, of course we'll do that. When can you come on? So it's that sort of thing. So I don't want to be that. I don't want to be a celebrity publicist who's known for this forever. I may as well transition that, if I can, into some sort of media role. So we'll see what happens. And but for the time being, it is what it is. I've been out promoting my book all over the place, and we'll see. But my book was really to be a tool that I could say to people, just read it in context, see where I came from, see why this made sense to me, and see why this wasn't political, and see why I say, I was naive, I was a bit dim-witted. I love your word. I'm going to use that from now on. When it came to this,
you have to give me credit each time, please.
I will give you credit for that. That's fine. But there are other people who, and the narrative certainly has changed. It definitely has changed a bit, but not completely. It's still there. And it's still, when I see major news outlets saying, well, this is what the Mueller report said, but Rob Goldstone did offer a thing from the Russian government, I want to shake them and go, why can't you say, but has since testified this, which gets rid of that? But they don't. They leave it there because it's a better story. So even though I've explained almost every word of that email away, they still use that email and go, well, despite what that says, Rob Goldstone said blah, 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 blah. Well, he's also explained what. See, I just talked about myself in the third person, so I have become
here we go.
Fabulously demented.
You're a Donald Trump in waiting.
Exactly.
Or a Maggie Thatcher.
But I appreciate an interview like this because it really does allow, not just to explain, but allow us to interact and talk about them. And I honestly have to believe that the more people talk things through and the more people look objectively at what it is, not just this, but other elements of life, it can only be for the good, because otherwise we can't just rely on these talking heads who, 24 hours a day spout a lot of agenda-driven nonsense, whatever your agenda is. It doesn't matter which side. Because I have to say that. I've been attacked from all sides because I don't pander to any side. My book, people said to me, if you attack Trump, these people would want it. If you attack the other side, then Trump's. Well, I didn't want to attack anybody. It just tells my story. So it doesn't really appeal to Trump supporters, Hillary supporters, or any other. But it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to put my story in context.
Right. Well, we definitely agree on the utility of these type of discussions, and I thank you again, Rob, for doing this. And
pleasure.
I offer you, I guess, some sympathies in terms of what you've gone through. I don't know what it's worth, but nonetheless.
No. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and thank you for such a great interview.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, there you have it. I hope you found that as edifying as I did. If you derive value from the stuff that I've been producing as of late, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Alternately, you can give financially through PayPal, or if you want to give through snail mail or Bitcoin or some other method, just contact me via email or Twitter DM, and I'll give you the pertinent information there. All right, see you next time.